The Fed15 podcast is presented by Serving Those Who Serve, a financial planning practice serving federal government employees and retirees all over the country. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as financial advice. All listeners should consult their personal advisors before taking any action. The opinions expressed by our hosts are their own and do not reflect the views, policies, or position of either Raymond James or Serving Those Who Serve. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Serving Those Who Serve is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services, Inc.
Welcome, everybody, to the Fed15 podcast, presented by Serving Those Who Serve. Each week, we'll discuss the latest news and info that Feds need to know in 15 minutes-ish or less, because sometimes I run over a little bit. So whether you're a seasoned federal employee or just starting out in your career, we've got you covered. So grab your coffee, your energy drink, your green juice, whatever gets you going, and we will tell you what you need to know, but just might have missed. It could have slipped by. We are your host. I'm Dan Sipe, and I am joined by the exceptional and the extraordinary Katelyn Murray.
Katelyn,
how are you? Always so kind. I'm doing great. I am doing really well. I am really embracing my gratefulness for air conditioning this week because I had an air conditioning unit go out, like many Americans on the East Coast who are dealing with the heat wave. So yeah, but it's all good. Local company got me patched up and it's good to go. But I can tell you, I have been sort of embracing the sort of summer heat, literally and figuratively, with a rewatch of an American classic franchise. I've been rewatching Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh, to go along with Axel.
All of them. Yes. Yes. I was telling Dan before recording, I was very excited to talk with him in our small talk session because I mean, I'm ready for the impressions. I know you got them. So, but, yes, I can tell you it stands the test of time. It is a great
Axel. You stole a house? How you steal a house, man?
How you steal a house? Yeah, it's amazing. I love, so we watched 2 last night, so we saw, obviously. And I love that scene. He's just like, this looks great, except for this building's not supposed to have any right angles. It's a donut building.
You're ruining this house.
You're ruining this house. It is really interesting how I think, because my brain's always going and I'm the weirdo thinking a bunch of thoughts all the time. So like I'm watching it, enjoying it, having a great time. Eddie Murphy, hilarious. If somehow you're listening to this podcast, I don't know how, and you haven't seen Beverly Hills Cop, maybe some of our like just starting out feds, definitely go watch
Incomplete Education.
Yes. Take a day of leave and watch that movie. It's it's important. But as I'm watching it, I'm like, wow, particularly that scene where he rolls up on the house project and like, he is able to kind of shut down operations entirely, right? How much do we believe just because somebody who seems to have authority says it, right? Kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting take. You know, that if somebody comes in sounding like they know what they're talking about,
mm-hmm.
you're going to listen to them. And you got to be careful about that because that happens. Boy, that happens a lot around us, doesn't it, Katelyn?
Yeah. I guess it's just our industry, right? That I think I kind of naturally think about these things. There's so many pundits, whether it's on TV or whether it's on YouTube or wherever, that like will talk about lots of topics. But, we know the securities industry and financial planning because that's where we operate. I think there's a lot of people who are able to kind of be talking heads and sound like they know what they're talking about, but do they really? What is their experience? Are they vetted? So not to take it down kind of a dark path, but I think that there's, always little lessons to be learned and everything.
Just because somebody rolls up and talks loud doesn't mean you should listen.
100%. Yep.
Because next thing you know, they got your house.
Yeah. Next thing you know, you're back from Hawaii and they're posted up in your house.
Yep.
So All right, folks. Well, we do have a couple of interesting topics to cover this week. Dan's going to be talking with you a little later about FEGLI. We love FEGLI. We have a lot of kind of content, obviously, on the website. And we also have a webinar on FEGLI. But Dan's going to talk with us a little bit about when FEGLI might not be the best option and when it might make sense to look at some other options there. But before we get there, I wanted to address an article on the site this week that covers a topic of interest, particularly for our special provisions folks. So
absolutely.
As you know, here at Serving Those Who Serve, we serve all feds. And there's lots of different subsects, lots of different agencies, lots of different, kind of different categories. And we love our special provisions folks. We have webinars dedicated to our special provisions folks. And this article is of particular interest there. So as of late, there's been some discourse around raising the retirement age for our federal air traffic controllers and potentially pilots. So currently, air traffic controllers have a mandatory retirement age of 56. And this is determined by the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. So obviously, due to safety concerns related to age-related cognitive and physical decline, air traffic controller is a very stressful, very intense sort of role. I really, really respect air traffic controllers because it requires a phenomenal amount of concentration, decision-making, memory, visual skills. You got to be on it. And scientific research suggests, that could start to decline as early as 45 in some, and that is the reason for that earlier mandatory retirement age. Obviously, very different from MRA for most of our civilian feds. Now, the pilot retirement age, interestingly, is set internationally, Dan, by the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO. Okay. So basically how that works, the mandatory retirement age is at 65, but once pilots turn 60, they have to undergo mandatory medical examinations every 6 months to ensure fitness to fly. And then at 65, regardless of those examination results, you could still be, on it, totally fit to fly, but there is that mandatory retirement age of 65. So recently, there's been a lot of conversation around potentially raising that age from 65 to 67, which would allow our experienced pilots to work longer, and that potentially could address the very critical shortage of pilots in the industry, because that is something that we are facing. So that's, they've kind of been weighing pros and cons on that. Obviously, there's tons of advances in healthcare and technology. Many, many, many of the clients that we work with are in their 50s and 60s. And, they're doing great, right? We're planning for longer and longer ages of mortality. Absolutely. And I think that, adjusting those retirement ages, certainly adjusting the cap, could make sense. So there isn't there was actually a proposal to actually raise the mandatory retirement age that went up in 2024, but did not pass. But due to like many things, and I'm sure Danny can back me up on this, but like many things, once we see it one time, then we tend to see it again and again. It sort of opens the door for the discussion, and we can sort of see that coming down the pike. So I do think that it's very likely that we could see that retirement age raise in the next couple of years. And with that adjustment, there are some, retirement strategies that could support a more secure future if you do get that extra time. Couple things just off the bat, looking at Social Security. If you're going to be working longer, you're going to have that income longer. You could look at delaying collection of Social Security for a little longer. You get a couple more years of saving to your TSP, which is a big boost, making sure that, as Dan mentioned on the podcast last week, that you're maxing out that catch-up contributions and making sure that we've got good use of that. And then also looking at your investment portfolio, right? So making sure that you're aligning your investment portfolio with a potentially extended retirement timeline, if that is something that you're interested in doing. So obviously, that we stay abreast of all of the kind of news in the federal space. So we will continue to watch this. We will continue to stay up on the conversation here and provide any updates. I also recommend that if this is you, if you are an air traffic controller, if you are a pilot, you can stay informed and prepared for potential changes by monitoring reliable sources, the FAA website being one, industry newsletters, and of course, professional organizations like Serving Those Who Serve. So
sure,
definitely kind of keep a beat out there for that.
Absolutely. In my opinion, you can't have too much information. Well, actually, too much quality information.
Yes.
Because you can have somebody standing outside your house shouting, and then all your workers leave. And so you got to be careful about that one too.
For sure.
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dan, you've got some info for us on FEGLI. Really interesting article. Tell us a little bit about
absolutely
when FEGLI might not be enough.
Absolutely. So the government launched the Federal Employee Group Life Insurance Program in the mid-50s. Do you know what else got launched in the mid-50s, Katelyn?
I believe that would be the inimitable Dan Seib.
Yeah, absolutely. And my bride loves watching, these home makeover shows and things like that. Mm-hmm. And as a result, a new thing crept into our vocabulary, and it's mid-century modern.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Very aware.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I've adopted that. Dan Seib, pleased to meet you on mid-century modern.
I cannot wait to show you all of my mid-century modern office furniture.
And so is FEGLI. FEGLI is mid-century modern. So here's the thing. FEGLI, Federal Employee Group Life Insurance, is a really, really good, solid group plan. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it. It breaks into two primary components, basic and optional coverage. Basic life is the salary round to the next highest 1,000 plus 2,000. Uncle Sam kicks in for that. So it's a pretty good deal. We encourage people to hang on to that, okay, over the course of their career, because if you keep it till the end and you've had it at least 5 years, you're going to get 25% of it for free in retirement if you follow certain guidelines. So pretty good deal, level premium over the course of the career. The optional coverage break into three components. Option A, which is a flat amount of $10,000. That's a little bit of an anachronism. It's a holdover to a time when 10,000 was a home mortgage. Pause.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that, Katelyn?
Yeah. Wow.
Option B is some multiple of the salary up to 5 times. Option C is spouse and dependent coverage, multiples of 5,000 on the spouse up to 25,000, 2,500 on each child, multiples of 5 up to 12,500. So where we get into the let's evaluate and see what works best really comes in the optional section. Because, and to be clear, this is not meant to bash or criticize FEGLI. When life insurance becomes an employee benefit, of necessity, it must be non-discriminatory in its pricing and its offering to the people it covers. So that would include age, degree of health, good or bad, smoking status, yes or no, and so forth, and also gender. Okay. So what that means is for many people, it may very well make sense to be familiar with private sector insurance options, because FEGLI is all term insurance. That means it has no memory. So if you have your option B, you have it for 15 years, you give it up. That's just that. You just don't have coverage anymore. And you don't have to pay. So that's the very nature of term insurance. What we have observed is that non-smoking people in average or better health many times can find in the private sector similar coverage for a lower out-of-pocket expense. And it can be pretty substantial. In my career, I've seen savings of 70%, because another thing, smokers pay more in the private sector than non-smokers. Men pay more in the private sector than women. So a female non-smoker can really see some opportunities for savings. There's another part here, though, and that is one of the limitations of any group life plan is it's always some multiple. So some multiple of your salary may be enough. It may not be. You need to have a strategy and have a plan for what components of your financial life you want to make self-completing if you pass away unexpectedly. And I'll say that again, make them self-completing. So, for example, you're in the process of saving for your kid's education. You don't come home tomorrow, you're not going to have the same money coming in. So what is an appropriate death benefit to make sure that all the kids are educated, to make sure that your spouse's life is taken care of? So you really need to take a look at that and say, okay, is 6 times my salary enough, or do I need to supplement? And when you're in the process of supplementing, that's a good time to compare and contrast costs for the optional portions. And again, this is not meant to bash FEGLI. You could have this conversation about just about any group term life insurance that is offered by a super employer.
Right.
And a super employer is somebody whose group of people is so large, it looks just like the general population. Mm-hmm. So there is nothing inherently in being a career federal employee that makes people live shorter or live longer than the general population. Okay. So that's where the homogenization of rates comes in, because the FEGLI, Office of Federal Group Life Insurance, knows that out of the population of the United States, a certain percentage still smoke, a certain percentage take certain types of medication, certain percentage have certain health conditions, and they have reasonable expectations that will be reflected within their group too. But they're not allowed to ask who's who.
Yeah.
So they have to average all those rates together. So take a look at the article. We go into some pretty good detail there, but don't be bashful about taking a look at your FEGLI, because you've experienced this too, Katelyn. We meet people that, are in their 50s, signed up for everything when they first started working and never looked at it again.
Absolutely.
Didn't realize. Now, here's a little inside tip. But under age 35, even under age 40, FEGLI, even the options sort of stay in the glide path of staying pretty competitive. I'm not saying you can't improve at all, but once you start crossing 40 and especially 45, you see where there's a divergence in what the private sector might offer you. So it's one of those places where you can find money that might be better spent on retirement, building your net worth, whatever, as far as taking outside coverage into consideration. So
for sure. That's a really good, I always like to hear Dan talk about life insurance because he knows that industry so well. Seriously, I think it's, and so many things that you brought up there, I want to call out, like, sitting down with your spouse and going through goals. This is the intersection of life insurance and financial planning. This is dansipe.com. Which if you don't own that URL, you should. But if we look at that, sitting down with your spouse and saying, okay, worst case scenario, either one of us doesn't come home from work tomorrow. What does it look like? We got 3 kids that we got to make sure we get through college. What is the cost of that? Accounting for inflation. And then also looking at your own retirement and life planning goals. If something happened to you, what is the degree of stability or fidelity that you would want to give to your spouse so that they could kind of stay on track for retirement or have a certain amount of resources for retirement? And maybe retirement for them, in a dual person retirement situation, obviously is going to look different than a singular person retiring. But, figuring out what that comfort point is for the two of you and making sure that you have an appropriate amount of life insurance in place for the right period of time. That's the other thing that, Dan, you alluded to. We see folks all the time who maybe when they were in their early 30s and they had 3 kids under 18 and they had college funding goals for those kids. Maybe they wanted to fund college at 100% for all 3 of those children. Maybe they had the correct insurance situation. But when you are in your late 50s and those kids have now gone to school, they've gotten a great education, they have, jobs, they're building their career and they're financially independent, you really need to check back in and reevaluate whether you need that insurance coverage. Because I see people all the time who are paying too much in insurance premiums given their situation. So
and they're happy and sad at the same time, aren't they, Katelyn? They're happy when we let them know and they can stop doing it. And they're sad they didn't look at it sooner.
Absolutely.
So,
that's one of my favorite ways to find a way. I always love to find ways to pay our fees for clients. And that's one of my favorite ways, right? If we can round up, just last week, I was actually working with a client in particular, and we found $2,000 of insurance premiums that they didn't need to pay, really. And so there's a lot of money that can potentially be there on an annual basis. So definitely think about doing an insurance roundup. But
absolutely.
I think for today, that's all the time that we have on the podcast. This is definitely one of the ish episodes, but important topics that we're covering. We want to make sure our folks are informed. All right, folks, that is all the time we have today, but we will be back next week to bring you all the latest updates you need to make informed decisions about your career and financial well-being as a Fed. Now, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on our YouTube channel or on Spotify so that you never miss an episode. And please do remember to share it with your friends and colleagues. Now, for more information on the topics covered in today's show and more, be sure to check out our blog at blog.stwserve.com. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Serving, to get all the latest news for Feds delivered straight to your inbox every week. And for those who want to dive even deeper into learning about your federal benefits and financial planning for Feds, we encourage you to join us for one of our complimentary webinars. We have Understanding FERS for Special Provisions Employees coming up. This is a great session for some of those pilots or air traffic controllers who may have been listening in on the earlier segment. That is coming up on July 25th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And again, that's a session on FERS for Special Provisions Employees. The rules are different for you guys, so definitely be sure to join us there. And if you're not a Special Provisions employee, but you still need to know how FERS works, of course you do as a Fed, you can attend our webinar on August 6th, 2024 from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So we are going to be talking about FERS for regular civilian Feds. Then definitely check it out if you fall into that category. We'd love to help you learn about FERS. Now, if you prefer a one-on-one approach, feel free to reach out to our team directly for a financial planning consultation at meetings@stwserve.com. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Fed15. I'm Katelyn Murray. Dan Sipe had to leave us, had some technical issues, but you will see both of us next week. Be well.